The snowstorm outside rattled the windows of the old Spencer family home, but inside the attic, the air was still, except for the sound of Lily Spencer's gloved hands rummaging through dusty boxes. A faint, musty scent hung in the space, mingled with the faint sweetness of aged cedar. Her breath clouded the chilly air as she whispered to herself, "Where is it?" It wasn't just nostalgia that drove Lily to dig through the past, it was desperation. Christmas was 3 days away, and she had no idea how to make it special. For the past 2 years, the holiday had been a hollow echo of what it used to be. Since her mother, Sarah, passed away, the Spencer family had fractured. Her father, Roger, withdrew into work. Her brother, James, all but disappeared to a different state. And the rest of their extended family? They simply stopped showing up. The silence in the house had become unbearable, especially at Christmas. "Come on, Mom," Lily muttered, pulling out another box of mismatched ornaments. "Help me find something, anything." Then, her fingers brushed against something solid and cold, an old wooden crate. Its edges were smooth from years of use, and faint faded letters on the lid read, "KCYX Radio 1987. Lily frowned. Her mother had never mentioned working for a radio station. Curiosity burned through her, and she pried open the crate. Inside, nestled among yellowed newspaper clippings and a few brittle cassette cases, was a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Its metal reels gleamed faintly under the dim attic bulb. Tucked beside it was a tape, its label written in a neat, youthful hand. Sarah's Christmas Special. "What is this?" Lily murmured, holding the tape up to the light. Her heart thudded in her chest. She didn't need to see the handwriting to know whose it was. Her mother's. Minutes later, Lily sat at the kitchen counter, a steaming mug of cocoa beside her, as she stared at the recorder. Her laptop sat open, YouTube playing a tutorial on how to operate the decades-old machine. Her pulse quickened as she threaded the tape into place. Finally, she pressed play. Static filled the room, crackling like a distant fire. Then, through the fuzz, a voice emerged, bright, cheerful, unmistakably young. "Hi, this is Sarah Fields, broadcasting live from KCYX for our Christmas Teen Hour. Today, I want to talk about the one thing I love most about the holidays: family." Lily froze, the mug slipping from her hands and spilling cocoa across the counter. She barely noticed. The voice from the tape had grabbed her completely. It was her mom. Not the soft-spoken, always-in-control mother she remembered, but a vibrant, bubbly teenager, brimming with dreams and enthusiasm. Lily leaned closer, gripping the edge of the counter. Christmas isn't just about gifts or decorations. It's about coming together. It's about creating memories with the people you love most. My dream? Well, it's to bring my family together in a way they'll never forget. The tape crackled again, and Sarah's voice continued, nervous but determined. "I know it's not always easy. Families fight, and people grow apart. But Christmas can fix that. I just know it." Lily's heart ached at the raw sincerity in her mother's words. Her fingers brushed a tear from her cheek. The recording ended with a giggle, followed by a simple wish. "Merry Christmas, everyone. And remember, make this holiday one to remember." The silence that followed felt heavier than the attic's dust. Lily leaned back in her chair, staring at the tape recorder as if it might offer more answers. She could still hear her mother's voice ringing in her ears, so full of hope and conviction. Her mother's dream wasn't just to celebrate Christmas, it was to bring the family together, to heal. The next morning, Lily woke with a renewed sense of purpose. Her mother's words had planted a seed, and now it was beginning to bloom. If Sarah could dream of a united family at her age, despite whatever challenges she faced, then Lily could make it happen now. It wouldn't be easy, she already knew that, but she had to try. The first step, convincing her father. Roger Spencer was in the living room, staring blankly at the TV while the local news droned in the background. The smell of burnt toast from his half-finished breakfast lingered in the air. Lily hesitated for a moment in the doorway, clutching the tape recorder in her hands. "Dad," she started cautiously. Roger turned his head, his expression tired. "Morning, Lily. You're up early." I found something yesterday." She crossed the room and placed the recorder on the coffee table. "It's a tape Mom made when she was a teenager, for a Christmas radio show." Roger raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "She talks about family," Lily continued, her voice faltering slightly, "about how Christmas can fix the things we think are broken. I want you to listen to it." Roger's eyes flickered with an emotion Lily couldn't quite place. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," he said after a long pause. "Please," she pressed, "just give it a chance, for Mom." Roger hesitated, his gaze lingering on the tape recorder. Finally, he nodded. "All right, play it." Lily pressed play, and once again, Sarah's youthful voice filled the room. Roger sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. By the time the tape ended, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "She always had big dreams," Roger murmured, his voice thick, "even as a kid." Lily sat down beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "She believed in us, Dad. I think she still does." Roger didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the Christmas tree in the corner of the room, its lights twinkling faintly in the morning light. "All right," he said finally, "let's give her dream a shot." As the day went on, Lily began reaching out to the rest of the family. Each call was met with resistance. James was the first to push back. "Lily, I'm not flying across the country just for a dinner," he said. "You know how things are with work." "It's not just a dinner," Lily argued. "It's about Mom. I found a tape she made when she was our age. You need to hear it." Her brother sighed. "Fine, but I'm not making any promises." Next, it was her cousin Elena who still harbored bitterness over an old argument with James. Uncle Mike, the family's resident cynic, almost laughed her off entirely. "You've got your work cut out for you, kid," he said, shaking his head. "This family's been broken for too long." But one by one, Lily managed to convince them. Slowly but surely, the pieces of her mother's dream began falling into place. And yet, as Christmas Eve approached, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that it might all fall apart. Could one old tape really be enough to fix what had been broken for so long? Christmas Eve arrived with a soft blanket of snow covering the quiet neighborhood. But inside Lily's house, the tension was anything but peaceful. The once familiar hum of holiday preparations was now filled with nervous anticipation. The invitations had been sent, the menu finalized, and the living room transformed into a glowing homage to Christmas past. The family would be here in just a few hours, and Lily could feel the weight of her mother's dream pressing on her shoulders. What if no one stayed long enough to hear the tape? What if old grudges ruined everything before it even began? The dining table, draped in a deep red tablecloth, was already set with mismatched plates from her mother's collection. Candles flickered among holly branches, and the centerpiece, a porcelain sleigh her mother had adored, tied it all together. Despite the warmth of the decorations, the air felt brittle, as though the slightest misstep could shatter everything. The sound of tires crunching snow jolted Lily from her thoughts. She wiped her hands on her apron, her heart racing as the first guests arrived. It was her father, Roger, with a bottle of wine in one hand and a cautious expression. He stepped inside, taking in the decorations with a slight nod. "You've been busy," he said, shrugging off his coat. "I wanted it to feel like her," Lily replied, her voice soft. Roger glanced at the mantel, where a family photo from a long-ago Christmas stood proudly. "She'd like it. You did good, kid." Lily smiled, but it was fleeting. There was no time to bask in her father's approval, not when the rest of the family was still on their way. One by one, they arrived. First came James, dragging a duffel bag behind him. He gave Lily a quick hug, but spent more time inspecting the table. "Mom would have loved this," he said quietly. Next was Elena, with her husband and 2 kids in tow. Her smile was polite, but it didn't reach her eyes knot when she spotted James. They exchanged an awkward nod, their unresolved tension like an icy draft in the room. Uncle Mike showed up late, carrying a store-bought fruitcake that he deposited on the counter with a gruff, Hope this counts as festive. As the family settled in, Lily couldn't ignore the distance between them. Conversations felt stilted, punctuated by long silences. James hovered near the fireplace, while Elena sat stiffly by the window. Roger poured himself a second glass of wine before dinner even started. The cracks in the family's foundation were painfully evident. Dinner began with polite small talk. The clink of silverware against plates was the only constant sound, punctuated by half-hearted compliments about the food. "So, James," Elena said suddenly, breaking the silence, "how's life in the big city?" James didn't look up. "Busy, lots of projects at work." "Must be nice to be so busy you can forget where you came from," she said, her tone sharp. James set his fork down. "Here we go. I didn't forget, Elena. I just had to live my life." "Some of us didn't have the luxury of leaving," she shot back. "We stayed to help Aunt Sarah while you—" "That's enough," Roger interrupted, his voice stern. Elena sat back, crossing her arms, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air. Lily felt her stomach churn. This wasn't what her mother would have wanted. When the meal was finished, Lily cleared her throat, her voice shaking slightly. "Before anyone leaves, I want to share something with you all." She brought out the tape recorder and placed it in the center of the table. "This is a recording Mom made when she was a teenager. I think you should hear it." The family exchanged uncertain glances. James leaned back in his chair, while Roger watched her closely. Lily pressed play, and once again, Sarah's youthful voice filled the room. "Hi, this is Sarah Fields, broadcasting live from KCYX for our Christmas Teen Hour. Today, I want to talk about the one thing I love most about the holidays: family." As the recording continued, the room grew quieter. Roger leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Elena's hardened expression softened, her gaze fixed on the recorder. Even James, who had seemed so detached all evening, sat up straighter, his jaw tightening at Sarah's heartfelt words. When the tape ended, a hush fell over the room. Roger was the first to speak. "I'd forgotten how much hope she had," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She believed in us," Lily added, "even when we weren't at our best." Elena looked down at her lap. "She was always holding us together," she said softly. James cleared his throat, his voice low. "Maybe that's why it all fell apart when she—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of his words hung in the air. Lily felt the familiar ache of grief rise in her chest, but she pushed it aside. "She wanted us to be a family again. That's why I invited you all here. I wanted us to remember her dream." Uncle Mike broke the silence with a gruff laugh. "Nice speech, kid. But you think one old tape is going to fix this mess?" His words stung, and Lily's face fell. "It's not about fixing everything," she said quietly. "It's about trying." "I remember when Sarah dragged me to one of her church charity drives," Mike said, his voice softening. "I complained the whole time, but she just smiled and said, 'Sometimes all people need is someone to believe in them.' I didn't get it then, but I think I do now." "Trying?" Mike leaned back, crossing his arms. "We've been trying for years, and look where it's gotten us. Nowhere." "Maybe it's not about the trying," Roger said, surprising everyone. He stared at the recorder, his expression distant. "Maybe it's about remembering why we try." The room fell silent again, but this time the tension was different, reflective. James spoke up, his tone softer than before. "She believed in us because she saw something worth saving. I think we owe it to her to see it too." Elena glanced at him, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. "Do you really believe that, James?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I do." Despite the flicker of understanding, the family wasn't healed, not yet. Old wounds weren't so easily mended, and years of distance couldn't be erased with a single conversation. But something had shifted. For the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope. Lily knew the night wasn't over. The tape had opened the door, but it was up to her family to walk through it. And as the clock ticked toward Christmas, she could only hope they'd find the courage to do so. The air inside the Spencer home was heavy with the unspoken words that hung between family members. The recording had cracked something open, but it hadn't yet mended what was broken. Around the dining table, the candles flickered, their warm glow casting shadows on faces deep in thought. Lily stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as she watched her family through the doorway. Her father was nursing another glass of wine, staring at the Christmas tree as if it held the answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. James had pulled out his phone, scrolling aimlessly, while Elena busied herself tidying up the dishes, an excuse to avoid talking to anyone. Uncle Mike sat alone at the end of the table, his arms crossed, looking every bit like he was waiting for the night to end. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Lily had imagined the tape sparking a wave of reconciliation, bringing everyone together in a flood of memories and gratitude. Instead, the cracks in her family seemed more pronounced, the distance between them stretching like the silence that filled the room. "Mom," she whispered under her breath, glancing toward the ceiling. "What do I do now?" A memory surfaced, her mother humming carols in the kitchen while stirring hot chocolate, her voice light and full of warmth. "When things feel too big, Lily," Sarah had said, "start small. One little step can change everything." Start small. Lily wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and carried a tray of hot cocoa into the living room. "All right," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "I think we could all use a break from awkward silence. Who wants marshmallows?" James glanced up from his phone, looking faintly amused. "You're bribing us with hot chocolate now?" "Absolutely," Lily replied, handing him a mug. "It's a Spencer family classic." Elena hesitated before taking a mug, her lips quirking into a reluctant smile. "Mom always added cinnamon," she said softly. Lily nodded. "Already in there, and extra marshmallows, just how she liked it." The small gesture seemed to ease the tension, and soon the family found themselves gathered in the living room, mugs in hand. Lily sank into the armchair, feeling the first flicker of hope. The room was quiet except for the crackling of the fire. After a moment, Roger cleared his throat. "That tape," he began, his voice low. Hearing her like that, it brought me back to when we were kids. She always had this way of making everything seem possible, even when it wasn't. Elena looked up from her mug. She believed in us more than we believed in ourselves. I always wondered how she did it. "She believed because she cared," James said, surprising everyone. "Mom always thought if you loved someone enough, you could figure out a way to make it work." Elena tilted her head. "Is that why you stopped calling? Because it wasn't working?" James flinched, but his expression hardened. "I left because I didn't want to be the one holding it all together after she died. That was her role, not mine." "And you thought leaving would solve anything?" Elena snapped. "I didn't know what else to do," James shot back. "I was broken too." "Enough." Roger's voice cut through their argument, his tone firm. "None of us handled it well, but pointing fingers isn't going to change anything." The room fell silent again, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't avoidance, it was reflection. Lily leaned forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Mom didn't leave that tape behind so we could fight about who was right or wrong. She left it because she wanted us to remember what it feels like to be a family, to try even when it's hard." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then, Uncle Mike let out a gruff laugh. "You've got her spirit, kid," he said, shaking his head. "Sarah never gave up on any of us, no matter how hopeless we seemed. Guess I forgot what that felt like." Lily's heart lifted at his words, but the moment was interrupted by a loud knock at the door. Everyone turned, confused. "I wasn't expecting anyone else," Lily said, rising to answer. When she opened the door, a gust of icy wind rushed in, along with a man holding a small package. He looked vaguely familiar, his cheeks red from the cold. "Sorry to bother you," he said, handing her the box. "This was delivered to my house by mistake. Looks like it's for your family." Lily took the package, her hands trembling slightly. The return address was smudged, but the handwriting on the label was unmistakable. It was her mother's. She closed the door and carried the package into the living room, her heart pounding. Lily stared at the package, her heart racing. The handwriting was unmistakable, it was her mother's. She turned, her family's confused faces mirroring her own unease. "Do you think it's really from her?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. This was sent to us," she said, setting it on the coffee table. "From Mom." Roger leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "That's impossible. She's been gone for 2 years." Lily carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a tin box decorated with Christmas trees. Inside were letters, each one addressed to a different family member. "Lily," Roger said, his voice shaking, "where did you say this came from?" "A neighbor delivered it," Lily replied. "It must have gotten lost in the mail or something." She handed the letters out, watching as her family opened them. Each letter was different, but the message was the same. Sarah had written to each of them about her dreams for their future, her hopes that they would find their way back to each other. By the time they finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. She knew," Elena whispered, clutching her letter to her chest. "She knew we'd need this." Roger wiped a tear from his cheek. She always did have a way of knowing exactly what to say. The family sat in silence, the weight of Sarah's words settling over them like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, the walls between them felt less insurmountable. Lily glanced at the tape recorder, her heart full. Her mother's voice had started this journey, but the letters had given it a destination. For the first time, she believed they could truly be a family again. And Christmas wasn't over yet. The clock struck midnight, marking the start of Christmas Day. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the neighborhood in a perfect stillness. Inside the Spencer home, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The tape recorder sat silent on the coffee table, its job done, but Sarah's voice lingered in the hearts of everyone gathered. For the first time in years, the house wasn't filled with awkward silences or polite distance. Instead, it brimmed with something Lily thought had been lost forever: connection. She sat quietly in the armchair, watching her family. Roger, her father, was holding his letter from Sarah, rereading it as if committing every word to memory. James and Elena, whose earlier tension had been palpable, were now sitting close, sharing memories of their childhood. Even Uncle Mike, the family cynic, leaned back on the couch, a soft smile tugging at his lips as he listened. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the fire. It was from something deeper, something Sarah had believed in with all her heart. Lily cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "There's one more thing I need to share," she said, her voice steady but emotional. She reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a second tape. The label, written in her mother's unmistakable handwriting, read, "Christmas 1987 Part 2. Roger looked up sharply. "Another one?" Lily nodded, her fingers brushing over the tape's surface. "I think this one was meant for us, not the radio. I found it in the same crate, but I didn't know if I should play it. Until now." The room fell silent as Lily placed the tape in the recorder and pressed play. Static crackled, followed by Sarah's voice, softer and more intimate than before. "Hi, everyone. If you're hearing this, it means you found the first tape. I hope it reminded you of what Christmas is all about: family, love, forgiveness. But I wanted to leave you something more, something just for you." Roger straightened in his chair, his grip tightening on his letter. James leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, while Elena wiped at her eyes. Even Uncle Mike, who rarely showed emotion, looked visibly moved. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that families aren't perfect," Sarah continued. "We fight, we drift apart. Sometimes we even hurt each other. But what makes a family special is that, no matter what, we come back. Christmas isn't magic, it's a chance to come back to each other." Her voice wavered, as if holding back tears. The family collectively held their breath. "I believe in you, in all of you. I know you can find your way back to each other, and when you do, I'll be there with you in spirit, every step of the way. I love you. Merry Christmas." The tape clicked to a stop. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lily broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Mom didn't leave that tape just to remind us of the past. She wanted us to remember we still have each other, a chance to come back together. Then Roger let out a deep sigh, taking off his glasses and rubbing his eyes. She always knew exactly what to say, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lily looked at her father, her heart full. She believed in us. That's why she made this for us, because she knew we'd need it. James nodded. Mom always saw the best in us. It's time we try to see it too. Uncle Mike cleared his throat. Guess that means me too, he said gruffly. Sarah never gave up on any of us. I've been a stubborn old fool, but maybe it's time I stop. Lily watched as her family absorbed Sarah's final message. She could see it in the way James shifted closer to Elena, in the way Roger sat taller, as though the weight of his grief had lifted slightly. Something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding that things would be different from now on. James broke the silence, turning to Elena. I'm sorry, he said simply, his voice low. For leaving, for not being there when you needed me. Elena hesitated, her gaze searching his face for sincerity. Then slowly, she reached out and took his hand. I'm sorry too, she said. Roger chuckled softly, his voice cracking with emotion. Would you look at that? A Christmas miracle. Uncle Mike let out a gruff laugh. Guess I'm next then. He turned to Roger, his expression sheepish. I should have been here more. Sarah would have wanted me to stick around for you and the kids. I'm sorry, Raj. Roger nodded, his smile faint but genuine. We're all guilty of forgetting what mattered, but maybe this is our chance to make it right. The hours stretched into the early morning, filled with laughter and stories. They reminisced about Sarah, her off-key caroling, her insistence on decorating the tree herself, even the time she burned the turkey and they had to eat pancakes for Christmas dinner. Lily remembered how her mother carefully hung the heart every Christmas Eve, saying, "This is the last touch, because love should always be the centerpiece." At some point, Roger stood and retrieved the heart-shaped ornament Sarah had left behind. He held it up for everyone to see. "She wanted us to remember this," he said, his voice steady. "That love brings us home. No matter how far we go, it always brings us back." He hung the ornament on the tree, stepping back to admire it. Lily joined him, slipping her hand into his. "She'd be proud of us, Dad." Roger looked at her, his eyes glistening. She always was. By dawn, the fire had burned down to embers, and the snow outside sparkled under the first light of Christmas morning. The family sat wrapped in blankets, surrounded by the remnants of their night together, empty mugs, crumpled tissue, and the hum of quiet conversation. Lily rested her head on Roger's shoulder, her heart full. "We did it," she whispered. Roger nodded, his gaze fixed on the tree. "No, Lily, your mother did. She always knew how to bring us together." Lily carefully unwrapped the ornament, hearing her mother's voice in her mind. "This is always the last touch, Lily, because love belongs at the center." The heart-shaped ornament twinkled on the tree, its inscription catching the light. "Love always brings us home." And for the first time in years, the Spencer family had truly found their way back to each other.